My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 36 years old, a major in the United States Air Force, and for most of my adult life I believed that loyalty was something you earn through sacrifice. Not the kind people post about online. The quiet kind. The kind that costs you holidays, birthdays, relationships, and the privilege of being fully understood by the people who share your last name. I didn't grow up dreaming of medals or rank. I grew up believing that if you carried your weight, if you showed up every time it mattered, people would do the same for you. I was wrong. Before I tell you how I learned that lesson, let me take you back to where everything started. Colorado Springs was where my life narrowed into focus. Pre-dawn air, cracked pavement, boots hitting the ground in unison. While other teenagers were worrying about prom dates and football games, I was running drills, learning discipline, learning how to shut down fear and keep moving anyway. The Air Force Academy didn't just train my body. It rewired my thinking. Structure became comfort. Responsibility became identity. I learned early that if you want control in chaos, you earn it through preparation. That mindset carried me through commissioning, through flight line briefings, through my first deployment overseas. My parents were proud back then. They were high school teachers, practical people, the kind who believed in stability and steady progress. When I stood in my blues at my commissioning ceremony, they took photos from every angle. Told their friends their daughter was an officer now. My younger sister, Lena, stood beside them smiling, already bored. Lena and I were opposites from the beginning. I followed rules. She learned how to bend people. I built a career on consistency. She built a life on charm. At first, it didn't seem like a problem. My deployments came quickly after I made captain. Europe, then the Middle East. Long rotations that blurred into each other. Work I still can't fully talk about. Missions that didn't make headlines but mattered anyway. I called home when I could. Sent texts across time zones. Lena's voice on those calls was always distracted, always half engaged, like I was interrupting something more interesting. She'd ask how long I'd be gone this time, whether I thought her new idea would work, whether I could help her out financially, just for a little while. And I did. I paid for her college tuition when she switched majors for the third time. Covered her car when it broke down during finals. Wired money for her first apartment deposit because my parents said she needed help getting started. I sent that money from a base overseas, hours before a mission briefing. I never asked for repayment. That's what family does, right? You take care of your own. I didn't see it then, but I was teaching her something. I was teaching her that my sacrifices were invisible, and my resources were unlimited. By the time I made major at 33, ahead of my year group, the pattern was set. Congratulations texts came late. Requests came immediately. That's amazing, she'd write. Then, hey, do you think you could co-sign this loan? My credit's weird right now. I should have noticed how rarely she asked about my work. How she never wanted details about where I'd been or what I was responsible for. My career was background noise to her life. Useful only when it could fund something. When I got assigned to Joint Base Andrews, close enough to home that my parents started talking about Sunday dinners again, Lena was planning her wedding. She was engaged to a man named Evan, who called himself an entrepreneur. He seemed to specialize in ideas that required other people's money. The wedding plans escalated fast. Professional engagement photos. Destination venue. A budget that made my head spin. My mother forwarded me photos with captions like, "Isn't she glowing?" Then followed it with, "When are you going to settle down?" I was managing personnel and operational readiness for units deploying to multiple theaters. Settling down wasn't on my timeline. Apparently, funding someone else's fantasy was. During a visit home that I missed because I was stuck in DC on weekend duty, Lena helped our mother clean out storage. She FaceTimed me from my childhood bedroom, holding up my shadow box. My medals. My ribbons. Awards tied to years of service and operations I still couldn't discuss. "Do you actually need all this military stuff?" she asked, like she was talking about old trophies. "It's just sitting here." I told her, clearly, calmly, not to touch it. Those weren't decorations. Some of those awards were federal property. Official items with identifiers. She rolled her eyes and said fine. That tone told me the conversation was already over for her. I ignored the warning sign, because ignoring things had become my specialty. The family group chat turned into a stream of wedding updates. Venue drama. Dress fittings. Vendor complaints. My mother reacted to everything. My father sent thumbs up emojis. I mostly stayed silent, reading messages between meetings, feeling like a guest in my own family. When I mentioned a change in my deployment schedule, Lena joked, "Can you not schedule military stuff during my wedding?" Evan added, "Seriously though, you can get out of that, right? Family comes first." I didn't explain that you don't get out of deployments. I didn't explain how many times family had come first already, in the form of rent checks and tuition payments and quiet sacrifices no one remembered. I just stopped posting. The jokes got sharper after that. Lena would laugh about my hero stories whenever I mentioned work. Evan would smirk. My parents would pretend not to hear it. When I mentioned my commissioning anniversary, 14 years of service, Lena said, "Are we still celebrating that?" 14 years. 4 continents. Combat zones. 2 graduate degrees completed during off-duty hours. And my own sister thought it was something we should stop acknowledging. I didn't realize then that I had trained my family to treat me this way. I'd taught them my boundaries were flexible, my time negotiable, my accomplishments optional. I'd made myself useful instead of respected. And once that line is crossed, it's almost impossible to go back. So I stayed quiet. I showed up when I could. I sent money when asked. I told myself this was the cost of being the responsible one. The strong one. The one who didn't need anything. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, everything broke. I was in a secure briefing when my phone lit up during a break. Unknown number. A screenshot attached. It was an online listing. Military medals. Air Force commendations. $250 or best offer. The photo showed my shadow box. My actual shadow box. The one I told Lena not to touch. I called her immediately. "Did you sell my medals?" I asked. Silence. Then annoyance. "Yeah. I needed cash for the final venue deposit." "They're just metal, Danny. You get replacements, right?" I told her they were federal property. That this wasn't a misunderstanding. That this was serious. She laughed and said I was being dramatic. Said she'd buy me new ones after the wedding. Then she hung up. I stood there in the hallway, phone in my hand, realizing that the line I'd refused to draw for years had just been crossed for me. And I hadn't even seen it coming. I thought the worst part would be the betrayal. I was wrong. The worst part was what came next. The first call after Lena hung up wasn't from my parents. It was from a friend who worked adjacent to investigations. Someone who knew how fast systems moved once something crossed the wrong line. "Danielle," he said quietly, that listing's already been flagged. This isn't staying private. I didn't ask how he knew. I already felt it settling in. That cold clarity that comes when a situation is no longer emotional, but procedural. My sister hadn't just hurt me. She'd triggered a process that doesn't care about family explanations or wedding stress. I called my mother. She already knew. Lena had told her she sold some old military things I wasn't using. She said I'd be fine with it. When I told my mother I'd explicitly warned Lena not to touch that box, there was a pause. Then the tone shifted. The one I'd heard my whole life whenever I complicated things by telling the truth. She's under a lot of stress, my mother said. Weddings are expensive. Can't you just fix this? Fix it. Like it was a scheduling conflict or a misplaced receipt. Like federal property theft was something you smoothed over with a phone call. I tried to explain, carefully, that I couldn't. That I wouldn't. That those items weren't mine to forgive away. My mother sighed, like I was being unreasonable. You always make things so rigid, she said. Can't you talk to someone? Explain it was a mistake? I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. Because I was done explaining my life to people who only listened when it benefited them. Saturday morning, while I was on base handling administrative work, federal agents knocked on Lena's door. She called me hysterical, barely able to speak. They're here, she cried. They're saying something about stolen military property. What did you do? I told her the truth. I hadn't done anything. The system had. She screamed that I'd ruined her life, that I'd chosen my career over her, that family doesn't do this to each other. I told her to tell the truth and cooperate. Then the line went dead. By the end of the day, my phone showed dozens of missed calls. Parents. Relatives. Numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't return any of them. I sat alone in my apartment that night, staring at a wall I suddenly realized I'd been leaning on for years, pretending it would hold everything up for me. The silence wasn't comforting, but it was honest. On Monday morning, I met with investigators. Professional. Calm. Thorough. They asked about storage, access, permissions. I answered everything directly. No embellishment. No defensiveness. When they asked if I'd given my sister permission to take the medals, I said no. When they asked if she knew what they were, I said I'd explained they were official awards tied to my service. They took notes. They asked about security measures. I told them the box had been locked, stored in my parents' home, accessed without my knowledge. They weren't looking to blame me. They were establishing facts. My commanding officer called me in later that day. She was direct. The investigation wasn't about me anymore, but it would touch my file. Family vulnerability was now a consideration. Not a punishment. A reality. She recommended a transfer. New command. Clean separation from personal complications. You've earned it, she said. Don't let this derail you. I accepted. Not because I wanted to run, but because staying would have meant shrinking myself to accommodate damage that wasn't mine to manage. That week, the narrative turned against me. Lena spoke to anyone who would listen. Friends. Distant relatives. Online outlets hungry for drama. The story became about a cold military sister who valued medals over family. Wedding stress. Bureaucracy. My parents asked me to make a statement. To smooth things over. To help Lena save face. I said nothing. Silence isn't weakness when the truth is documented. Silence is discipline. Eventually, investigators asked how I wanted to proceed. Support prosecution. Decline involvement. Or submit an impact statement and let the system decide. I chose the third option. I described the facts. The significance of the items. The breach of trust. I didn't ask for leniency. I didn't ask for punishment. I let consequences exist without trying to control them. That was the first real boundary I'd ever set. Lena's wedding went on without me. I saw photos later. Smiles. Filters. Perfection curated for public consumption. Behind the scenes, her influencer income collapsed. Sponsors walked away. Reality arrived quietly, exactly when it was supposed to. My parents didn't speak to me for months. When they did, it was strained. Polite. Careful. Like I was someone they didn't fully recognize anymore. But something else happened, too. Without the constant noise, my life simplified. My work sharpened. I took command. I led people who respected clarity and accountability because their lives depended on it. I hung my recovered shadow box in my office, evidence tag still attached. Not out of bitterness. As a reminder. To myself. To anyone who asked. Accountability isn't abstract. It's personal. One night, after a long day, a fellow officer sat across from me at a bar near base. He told me about his own family betrayal. About choosing boundaries over guilt. You don't stop loving them, he said. You just stop bleeding for them. That sentence stayed with me. Because that's exactly what I'd been doing for years. Bleeding quietly. Calling it loyalty. The calls eventually slowed. The anger burned itself out. What remained was distance. And clarity. I didn't feel victorious. I felt calm. And for the first time in my life, that calm wasn't something I had to earn by sacrificing myself. For a long time after everything fell apart, I didn't hear from Lena at all. No calls. No texts. No indirect messages through relatives. At first, I assumed it was anger. Then embarrassment. Then I realized something more uncomfortable. She had finally run out of people to blame. When the noise disappears, you're left alone with yourself. That's where change either starts or never happens at all. Almost a year after the investigation closed, a letter arrived at my new duty station. Handwritten. My sister's handwriting was always neat, carefully controlled, like she was trying to prove something even on paper. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on my desk for 2 days, next to performance reports and maintenance readiness charts. I needed to be sure I was ready to read it without reacting. The letter was simple. No excuses. No justifications. She didn't blame stress or weddings or money. She wrote that losing everything she'd built forced her to see herself clearly for the first time. That she'd treated me like a resource instead of a person. That she'd convinced herself my service didn't matter because admitting it did would have required gratitude. She wrote that paying restitution, getting a real job, and living without applause had humbled her in ways no lecture ever could. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for help. She just said she was sorry, and that she finally understood what accountability meant. I stared at that letter for a long time. In the military, we're taught that accountability is non-negotiable. You mess up, you own it. You don't hide behind rank, relationships, or good intentions. But no one teaches you what accountability looks like inside a family. There's no manual for what to do when someone you love finally takes responsibility after burning everything down. I didn't respond immediately. I watched instead. I paid attention to actions, not words. Months passed. She stayed quiet. She worked. She repaid every dollar she owed. She stopped trying to rewrite the story. That mattered more than any apology. Eventually, I wrote back. Not to restore what we'd lost, but to define what might be possible. I told her the truth. That the sisterhood we had before was gone. That trust doesn't reset just because time passes. But that I was willing to see who she was becoming, not who she used to be. I told her that rebuilding anything would be slow, conditional, and honest. No money. No favors. No emotional leverage. Just two adults starting from zero. She agreed without hesitation. Over time, contact resumed. Carefully. Short messages. Neutral conversations. Updates about work. About life. Nothing emotional at first. No pressure. And slowly, something unfamiliar began to form. Respect. Not obligation. Not guilt. Respect. The kind that doesn't demand, doesn't take, doesn't assume. My parents were slower. They never fully apologized, not in the way I might have wanted. But they stopped asking me to fix things. They stopped minimizing what happened. Sometimes progress isn't a confession. Sometimes it's changed behavior. I learned to accept that, too. Years passed. My career moved forward. Command positions. Strategic assignments. Promotions earned, not given. The shadow box stayed with me, moving from office to office, base to base. The evidence tag faded with time, but I never removed it. Officers and cadets would sometimes ask why it was there. I always gave the same answer. Because integrity is proven, not claimed. Because when the cost is high, your choices matter more than your intentions. Eventually, Lena and I sat across from each other again, not as sisters trying to reclaim childhood, but as adults choosing connection. There were no tears. No dramatic reconciliation. Just conversation. Honesty. A mutual understanding that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's convenience. Today, my life is quieter in the ways that matter. I don't fund anyone else's comfort. I don't confuse generosity with self-erasure. I don't measure my worth by how much damage I can absorb. I serve. I lead. I protect. But I no longer bleed for people who refuse to carry their own weight. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you don't love someone. It means you love yourself enough to stop enabling harm. Consequences aren't cruelty. They're clarity. And sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is step back and let reality teach the lesson you've been trying to explain for years. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Have you ever protected someone at the expense of your own well-being? Where should your line have been? Would you have reported what I reported, or handled it privately? And if someone truly changes, does that earn forgiveness, or just the chance to start over? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them. And if you found value in this story, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need the reminder. New stories every week. Sometimes the hardest missions aren't overseas. Sometimes they're at home.